Nathan Carter carried himself like someone who had learned early that quiet was not the same thing as absence. He was a third-year medical student at Oregon Health and Science University, the type who took detailed notes in lectures, who kept his cadaver lab journal tidy, who remembered attending physicians' coffee orders without being asked. He wasn't aloof so much as inward, a careful observer with a steady center. At home in Portland, his parents still made dinner together most nights, and the small rituals of their house, jazz on low volume, warm lamps instead of overhead lights, the habit of asking how the day really went, had given him a picture of the kind of family he wanted someday. It was simple and unwavering. A front door that always opened, a voice in the other room, the certainty that in the worst hour someone would come down the hall toward you. That image stayed with him during the long hospital shifts and the lonely train rides across the city in rain that felt like a second, whether inside the bones. 2 weeks before finals, when professors encouraged library days, his friends proposed the opposite. They rented a cheap room behind a weathered beach house in Newport, a place with a narrow porch and hydrangeas that pressed their blue heads against the steps. The room had 4 single beds and a draft around the window frame, and they loved it on sight. The coast was cold for June, the sky a soft, stubborn gray, but they swore that made it better. Fewer tourists, clearer air, a clean horizon. They arrived near noon, dumped backpacks, and walked downhill until the sidewalk ran out and sand took over. The water slapped at their ankles like a dare. Nathan stood there longer than the others, as if the steady pull of the tide could rinse all the fluorescent light of the hospital from his eyes. That night, they tried a diner with a neon sign promising chowder and pie. They ordered both. The waitress called them Han, and topped off their coffee until midnight. Someone put quarters in the tabletop jukebox. Everything felt provisional and first draft, the way all good student trips feel. Half joke and half sacrament. On the second afternoon, Nathan decided to see the shoreline from the water. The others wanted burgers and another nap. He wanted the sound of an engine and wind. He bought a ticket at the Yucuna Bay Pier for a small sightseeing boat that ran along the jetties and out toward the black rocks south of the lighthouse. 10 people came aboard, 2 older women with cameras already out of their cases, a group of college kids who had brought beer in a brown paper bag, a businessman in a blazer too thin for the wind, a young mother shepherding 2 children who couldn't stop touching the rail, and near the back a woman alone, sitting very straight, watching the harbor with a look that suggested she was taking stock of it for later. When the captain eased the throttle forward and the boat nosed past the crab pots, the gulls lifted, and the smell of diesel and salt braided together into something that felt like starting over. He noticed her in the slow part of the channel, the moment when conversation drifts and everyone pretends they aren't arranging themselves for a better view. She had dark hair pulled back loosely and a sea green jacket zipped halfway, a color that made sense here. She wasn't performing the view. She was genuinely with it, mapping rock and water like a private inventory. He heard himself say hello and was embarrassed at how schoolboy it sounded. She turned, surprised but unbothered. Emily, she said when he introduced himself, and the name settled easily in his ear. They spoke the way strangers talk when both understand there is no obligation to continue, and yet they keep continuing. They traded small things that reveal more than big things do. The way Portland rain can feel like static on a radio, the best time to buy coffee at the hospital cafeteria before the lines go feral, the childhood certainty that the lighthouse beam belongs to you when it sweeps your window. The captain pointed out cormorants drying their wings on a piling. The college kids hooped when a wave sprayed them. The older women marveled at how the light made everything look like an old photograph. Emily laughed at something Nathan said about scrubs never truly smelling clean again, then looked away quickly, as if the laugh had escaped without permission. The boat surged beyond the breakwater and shuddered in open chop. Nathan reached for the seat back more for her balance than his own, and then released it, unsure whether touching the world around her was the same as touching her. She seemed to appreciate the gesture in the momentary way people do when they've learned to kidnap their own gratitude before it becomes a debt. When the captain circled back, announcing they would swing once more past the rocks, The wind cut sharper. Emily zipped her jacket and asked if he was from the coast. Portland, he said. She nodded and said she was nearby for a few days, deflecting any sense of permanence the way travelers do. They fell into a quiet that wasn't awkward. He realized that for the first time in a long time, he wasn't measuring conversation like a resident evaluating vitals, trying to decide what to do next. He could simply stand there and let the details present themselves without needing to solve anything. They docked with the gentle thud that always feels a little final. People began the choreography of departure. Sunglasses back on, cameras capped, phones out. He didn't want to say goodbye in the way people do when there was no there in the first place. So he walked with her toward the pier, matching the length of his steps to hers, and asked if she had tried the saltwater taffy at the little shop with the neon gull that blinked one wing reluctantly. She hadn't. He told her the taffy wasn't the point, the sign was. She smiled in a way that confirmed she already knew what he meant. They shared a paper boat of fries and traded the worst coffee shop espresso shots they had ever suffered through. And he felt a warmth not unlike the one he carried from his parents' kitchen. Ordinary kindness set down carefully between two people. When it was time to let the afternoon take them its separate ways, they made a plan without dramatics. Tomorrow, 3 o'clock, beneath the neon gull, which would be impossible to miss even if it tried. It rained in the morning. The kind of coast rain that doesn't announce itself, that simply becomes the fact of air. His friends returned from a run to the bakery. He ate a cinnamon roll without tasting it. By 2:30, he was already hovering near the shop, pretending to inspect keychains and postcards, yick went ahead in endless iterations, while keeping the neon gull in his periphery. He told himself not to check his watch. He checked anyway. At 3, the sign flickered like an old joke and stuttered to life. He stood there and imagined the sound her shoes might make on wet planks. At 3:10, he practiced patience. At 3:20, he decided not to be unreasonable. At 3:40, he performed a small ritual of looking up the street and down the pier and back again, as if a sequence of glances could conjure a body. The young mother from the boat passed with her 2 children, paper cones of taffy in each hand. The businessman hurried by, talking into his phone. The college kids shouted from a truck bed and were gone. The sky didn't change its mind. By 4, he had rehearsed reasonable explanations and rejected them for being too easy. He walked the length of the pier to the parking lot and back, then ducked into the diner to see if her jacket color appeared in a booth. It did not. He returned to the neon gull and stood where they had agreed because some promises are so small they feel sacred. At 5, the rain was finer and felt more personal. He told himself there might have been a family emergency, a delayed bus, a headache, a change of heart. He told himself to be decent about it. He told himself to leave. He climbed the hill back to the room, slowly, feeling the rise in his legs like a penalty. No one asked what happened. His friends could read the answer as easily as a lab value on a chart. They made space for him to sit on the porch, let the hydrangeas breathe damp sweetness into the air, and said nothing they would later regret. After a while, he went inside and lay on his back and watched the window turn from pearl to pewter. He wasn't heartbroken, he told himself. Heartbreak belongs to stories that had a chance to start. This was something else, something like a door that never opened and yet left the shape of its frame on the wall of the day. In the morning they packed, returned the key, and thanked the landlord for the fair price. The car pointed inland, and the road threaded through pines slick with rain. Nathan kept seeing the stutter of the neon gull, the way one wing refused to blink in rhythm, as if the sign itself had a failing impulse it couldn't correct. Back in Portland, he put his head down and studied, and when he walked into the hospital, he did it with his usual calm. But the first cut of love is not always from a sharp blade. Sometimes it is from the simple absence of what was almost there. He did not chase it. He did not tell anyone. He filed it in that interior cabinet where he kept things that had the power to return without notice. And they did. Nathan Carter graduated near the top of his class. The ceremony was held in the great auditorium at Oregon Health and Science University. the air thick with the smell of flowers and the nervous hum of families waiting for names to be called. When his turn came, he walked across the stage with his usual calm, shook hands, and returned to his seat without looking for a camera. He smiled only once, when he caught sight of his parents clapping with the same unguarded pride they had shown at his high school graduation. He was their son who had fulfilled every promise, a boy who had dreamed quietly and then delivered loudly. From that moment on, medicine claimed him completely. Residency demanded years of brutal hours, sleepless nights, and the kind of vigilance that only those who live under fluorescent light understand. Nathan thrived in it. He specialized in neurosurgery, a field where failure was never theoretical, but written in permanent ink across lives. He found rhythm in precision. The silence of the operating room, the narrow window between life and loss, the discipline of steady hands. Attendings praised his composure. Patients' families clung to his measured words. Within a decade, Nathan Carter became one of the youngest neurosurgeons at Portland's largest hospital, a man with a reputation for brilliance and restraint. The newspaper once ran a short profile, "The Calm Hand in Crisis." His colleagues cut it out and pinned it on the staff lounge board. Nathan himself folded his copy into a drawer, where it sat between unpaid parking tickets and the manual for a coffee maker he never learned to use properly. Success, for him, had never been about headlines. It was about control, the knowledge that in the sterile white world of neurosurgery, variables could be managed, outcomes could be wrestled into submission if only one fought hard enough. Yet, outside the hospital, that control dissolved. He lived alone in a modern apartment overlooking the Willamette River. The view was fine, the silence was finer. Evenings were marked by the same routine. He cooked meals for one, read medical journals, and sometimes walked the waterfront trail long after the streetlights buzzed on. His neighbors came and went without learning much about him beyond doctor and quiet. He was polite but untouchable, a man who smiled without opening a door. Somewhere in those years he married. Her name was Allison, a resident in anesthesiology with a sharp wit and a voice that carried in crowded rooms. Their courtship had been brief, built less on passion than on proximity. Long nights on call, meals stolen in the cafeteria, the relief of collapsing into conversation with someone who understood the grind. They married in a small ceremony with a few colleagues as witnesses. For a while it worked. They respected each other's ambition. They gave each other space. But respect is not the same as intimacy, and space becomes a gulf when nothing else bridges it. Arguments were rare, not because they lived in harmony, but because neither invested enough to fight. When Allison was offered a fellowship in California, she accepted. Nathan did not protest. Divorce papers followed a year later, handled with the same efficiency as an insurance claim. They parted with no anger, no lingering affection, just the silent agreement that they had never really been together. For Nathan, it confirmed what he had always suspected. Marriage without love was a contract without meaning. He signed where required, and the chapter closed. In the quiet afterward, Emily returned. Not in flesh, not in phone calls, but in memory. A neon gull flickering above a candy shop on the Oregon coast would appear uninvited in his mind when he least expected it. While scrubbing in, while charting notes, while watching the rain blur headlights on the interstate. He told himself it was foolish to hold onto a girl he had known for less than a day. He told himself that his work was enough, that saving lives mattered more than a memory of eyes that had met his across a boat railing. Yet the truth lived deeper than reason. Emily Hayes had marked him, not by presence but by absence. The wound was small, but permanent, like a hairline fracture that aches in certain weather. Years passed in this strange rhythm. Nathan became the doctor families prayed for when they arrived at the ER in chaos. His name carried weight in medical journals, in conferences, in whispered hospital corridors. Students admired him, nurses trusted him, administrators wanted him on committees. But in the pages of his personal life, there were no names written beside his own. friends from college married, raised children, and invited him to barbecues where he brought expensive wine and left early. His parents asked gently once or twice if he had met anyone. He deflected with stories about long shifts, new procedures, and research grants. They stopped asking, though the question hung in the room every time he visited for Sunday dinner. He was not unhappy, not in the way people mean when they speak of despair. He laughed sometimes, he felt satisfaction in his work. He valued his parents' steady love. But he lived as though one room of his house had been locked from the inside long ago, and no one, neither Allison nor anyone else, had ever been given the key. On winter nights, when the city pressed its damp chill against his apartment windows, he sometimes dreamed of the sea. In those dreams, he was always running, late for something he couldn't quite reach. A neon sign blinked, wings stuttering out of rhythm, and when he arrived, there was nothing waiting. He woke with the echo of gulls in his ears and the taste of salt on his tongue, and for a moment he almost believed he had slept near the shore. Then the hum of the refrigerator, the city lights, the pile of unread journals reminded him where he was. He shook off the feeling, showered, dressed, and returned to the one place he was certain of himself, the operating room. Colleagues admired his discipline, his refusal to be rattled. But those who worked closest to him knew something else. They saw the way his eyes drifted during celebrations, the way he avoided hospital holiday parties, the way he lingered alone at the nurse's station after a long surgery. They respected him, but no one truly knew him. Not one person had stepped fully into his inner world. He was the surgeon with perfect hands, steady under pressure, a model of composure. And yet, beneath that mask of control, Nathan Carter remained a man still haunted by a woman he had met once and lost. Years had hardened the edges of memory, but they had not erased it. Emily Hayes was gone, perhaps forever, and yet she lived in him like a refrain he could not silence. He carried her absence as if it were part of his anatomy, an old scar visible only to him. And though he told no one, though he never spoke her name, it shaped the quiet life he built, successful, respected, but solitary. A man at the top of his field, standing always just outside the warmth he longed for, unable to cross into the life that might have been. Nathan Carter boarded the early morning flight from Portland to Seattle with a folder of notes under one arm and a cup of black coffee in the other. He had been invited to speak at a neurosurgery conference, a 3-day event where research was dissected like tissue under a microscope. For most of the doctors, these conferences were a chance to network, to shake hands, to drink overpriced wine in hotel lounges. For Nathan, it was duty, share data, answer questions, and leave. He valued the exchange of knowledge, but had no appetite for the posturing that always came with it. The flight was a short one, barely an hour, and the cabin carried the hushed energy of business travelers and early risers. Nathan sat near the middle, aisle seat, headphones in but no music playing, letting the white noise of the plane swallow his thoughts. He flipped through his notes, slides on new microsurgical techniques, outcome charts, mortality rates. His mind was in order, his morning under control. It was halfway through the climb to cruising altitude when he heard the first cry. Not the usual whimper of a restless child, but sharp, panicked, cutting through the drone of the engines. He removed his headphones. A few rows ahead, a girl, no older than 8, was slumped in her seat. Her small body convulsed, lips paling. The passengers around her froze, startled, then erupted in overlapping voices. "Is she choking? Get water. Call the flight attendant." Nathan was on his feet before the crew even reached her. "I'm a doctor," he said, his voice steady but loud enough to cut through the noise. The mother beside the girl looked up, wild with fear. She has a heart condition. Please." Her words tumbled out, fractured. Nathan's eyes flicked over the child, shallow breaths, a weak pulse fluttering under fragile skin. He unbuckled her belt and lifted her gently onto the aisle floor, instructing the flight attendants to bring the medical kit, oxygen, anything available. The cabin became a stage of controlled chaos. Passengers craned their necks, murmuring prayers, whispering speculation. The flight attendants rushed back with the kit, their faces pale. Nathan worked quickly, oxygen mask, checking vitals, stabilizing airway. He asked for ice packs, improvised positioning with rolled jackets. His mind was sharp, detached, every movement drawn from years of practice. Yet beneath the precision there was urgency. This was not a sterile, or this was 10,000 feet in the air with limited tools and a child whose life dangled by seconds. The girl's breathing faltered, then stilled, and a ripple of horror spread through the cabin. Nathan pressed compressions, his voice firm. Count with me. 1, 2, 3. He felt resistance, then the fragile rhythm of life returning. The oxygen hissed into her lungs, color flickering back into her cheeks. Passengers wept silently. The mother clutched the armrest, her knuckles bone white, whispering prayers between sobs. Minutes stretched into hours, though in truth it was barely 2. Nathan monitored, continuously, adjusting, stabilizing, coaxing her body into balance. His shirt clung to his back with sweat. His hands never wavered. Every time her pulse strengthened, he allowed himself a breath. Every time it weakened, his jaw tightened. By the time the captain announced their descent into Seattle, the girl was stable, oxygen saturating, her small chest rising with fragile persistence. The crisis had passed, but the memory of those minutes would cling to everyone on board. The passengers erupted into applause, awkward but heartfelt, the kind reserved for moments when gratitude overflows and has nowhere else to go. Nathan shook his head, brushing it off, telling them to save their energy for the child. He lifted her gently back to her seat, tucking a blanket around her thin shoulders. The flight attendants hovered, thanking him in hushed voices, promising that paramedics would be waiting at the gate. He nodded, exhaustion threading through his body, but his expression remained composed. As the plane taxied, Nathan leaned back, finally allowing himself a sip of water. His heart still hammered, though his face gave nothing away. He told himself it was routine. He had faced life and death before, countless times. But there was something about the narrow cabin, the trapped air, the eyes of strangers fixed on him, that made the weight heavier. When the plane door opened, paramedics boarded swiftly. Nathan relayed vitals, history as best he knew from the mother's frantic words, and transferred care. He stood aside, adjusting his cuffs, ready to slip back into anonymity. That was when he felt it, a shift in the air, a presence. The mother turned to him. Her hands trembled as she reached for his. Her lips parted to form words of thanks, but then her eyes widened. For a moment, the chaos fell away. Her gaze locked onto his, recognition flaring like a strike of lightning across years. Nathan froze, the world narrowing to her face. Emily. Her hair was darker now, pulled back hastily, her features sharper with time, but there was no mistaking her. The same eyes that had once met his across the railing of a sightseeing boat, the same voice that had laughed softly at a joke about hospital coffee. "Nathan!" she whispered, disbelief tangled in her tone. He could not answer at first. His throat felt parched, his mind caught between past and present. He had imagined this face countless times in sleepless nights, in dreams salted with memory. Now it was here, inches away, framed by the raw panic of a mother nearly undone by fear. "It's you," he managed, the words low, almost reverent. She nodded, tears spilling freely now, not only from relief at her daughter's survival, but from the shock of recognition. The girl stirred faintly, murmuring, and Emily bent to kiss her forehead, whispering comfort. Then she looked back at Nathan, as if to confirm he had not vanished again, as if to prove to herself that fate could be this cruel and this merciful at once. For Nathan, the cabin blurred, the applauding passengers, the paramedics, the flashing lights outside the window. All of it receded, leaving only the impossible truth. After years of silence, after a lifetime of wondering, he was standing face to face with Emily Hayes. And this time, it was not on a pier with a neon gull above them. It was in the fragile heartbeat of a child between life and death. Seattle greeted them with wet streets and the scent of coffee that seemed to seep from every corner. After the chaos of the flight and the blur of paramedics escorting Lily to the children's hospital for observation, the city felt strangely calm. Nathan lingered in the waiting room until the doctors confirmed what he had already known. The girl was stable, recovering, no lasting damage expected. He signed a few notes, answered routine questions, and only then allowed himself to leave. But when he turned toward the exit, Emily was there, her hair pulled back loosely now, eyes rimmed with fatigue, yet still holding that light of recognition. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice breaking slightly on the second word. It was gratitude, yes, but also disbelief, an acknowledgement that fate had drawn a perfect circle she had never imagined closing. They agreed to meet the next day. No grand promises, just a place and time. Like before, except this time Emily appeared. A cafe near Pike Place Market, a space of wood tables and steamed windows, where the sound of espresso machines softened the silence between words. Nathan arrived early, ordered tea he barely touched, and watched the rain stripe the glass until she walked in. Emily looked different from the girl he remembered on the boat, but not in a way that diminished her. She carried herself with the steady posture of someone who had weathered storms and refused to bend entirely. They began cautiously, like divers testing cold water. Polite questions about work, about the conference, about Lily's condition. But the surface broke quickly. Emily leaned back, exhaled, and said, "I should tell you what happened after." Her eyes searched his face, as if to see whether the years had hardened him. She told him about Mark Hayes. They had met young, she said, too young to understand the difference between admiration and love. Mark was ambitious, charming, the kind of man who filled a room with plans and insisted they were destiny. At first she was swept into it. Weddings, mortgages, the rhythm of married life. Lily was born a year later, and for a time Emily believed she had stepped into the life she wanted. But ambition corrodes when untethered. Mark began to travel, to stay out late, to turn charm outward instead of inward. She discovered the affair almost by accident. A phone left unlocked, a pattern of absences that became undeniable. "When you're a mother," Emily said, staring into her untouched latte, "you stop asking what you deserve. You start asking what your child deserves." And I knew Lily deserved better than a father who treated family like a hobby. The divorce was bitter, the custody battle worse. Mark wanted control, but not responsibility. In the end, Emily secured primary custody, but at the cost of sleepless nights, lawyers' fees, and a heart ground down by betrayal. "I work 2 jobs now," she admitted, teaching part-time and contract work translating. "It keeps us afloat. Some months barely." Nathan listened, not interrupting. He recognized the cadence of her words. Someone who had told this story before, but never quite like this. Never to someone whose opinion mattered in a way she couldn't explain. He wanted to reach across the table, to cover her hand with his, but he kept his palms flat, afraid that any gesture might fracture the fragile space between them. When she paused, he finally spoke. "I was married once," he said. "It didn't last. We thought respect would be enough, but respect without love is just quiet." He described Allison briefly, the anesthesiologist, the fellowship in California, the efficient end. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't need to. The emptiness between the lines told its own story. Emily looked at him, a faint, sad smile tugging at her mouth. So we both learned the hard way. They met again the following evening, and again after that. Sometimes in crowded cafes, sometimes walking along the waterfront where neon signs smeared themselves into the wet pavement. Conversations deepened. Emily spoke of Lily's laughter, of bedtime stories read aloud even when exhaustion pressed against her eyelids, of the small triumphs of motherhood, a fever gone down, a school project finished, a hug given freely. She confessed the fear that stalked her. What if Lily grew up resenting her for raising her alone? What if Mark's shadow lingered too long? Nathan countered with his own admissions. The nights in the hospital when he felt more machine than man, the mornings he woke to silence so thick it felt like a second skin, the ache of wondering about a girl who had once promised to meet him under neon light and never arrived. One evening, as they walked past the market where vendors were closing up, Emily stopped abruptly. "Do you hate me for that?" she asked softly. "For not showing up?" Nathan considered his answer carefully. The truth was complicated. The years of imagining, the sting of abandonment, the scar that had shaped his solitude. Yet looking at her now, older, worn but unbroken, he felt the anger had dissolved long ago. "I don't hate you," he said. "I never could. I only wondered why." Her eyes glistened. "Life happened. Circumstances I wasn't strong enough to explain then. I'm sorry." The apology hung between them, fragile and real. Nathan accepted it not with words, but with the quiet way he walked beside her, matching her pace as if to prove that the years hadn't completely stolen their rhythm. There was joy in these meetings, undeniable. They laughed at trivial things, the worst hospital food, the chaos of airline travel, the absurdity of Seattle traffic. Yet beneath the laughter, a current of caution ran strong. Both carried wounds, not yet fully healed. For Nathan, it was the fear of opening the locked room in his heart only to find it emptied again. For Emily, it was the terror of trusting another man, of risking her daughter's fragile stability. Still, the city seemed to conspire in their favor. The rain softened around them. Street musicians played as though for their private audience, and every cafe corner felt like a shelter carved out of the storm. Nights ended reluctantly, with promises to meet again, each parting leaving behind the strange ache of something both rekindled and untested. By the end of the week, Nathan found himself lingering at the hospital conference less and less, rushing instead to wherever Emily would be, sometimes with Lily in tow, sometimes not. He told himself it was coincidence, then stopped pretending. He was drawn, inexorably, back into the orbit of a woman he had never truly left. Yet, even in the warmth of rediscovery, caution held its ground. Emily once said, staring out at the gray expanse of Puget Sound, "Happiness feels dangerous. Every time I think I can breathe, something goes wrong." Nathan wanted to tell her that this time would be different, that he would never vanish or betray. But he understood too well the weight of promises. So he said only, "Then let's just breathe for today." In those words, there was both joy and restraint, a promise not of forever, but of presence. And for two people scarred by absence, that was enough for now. Seattle's skies cleared only briefly that week, long enough for Nathan and Emily to steal a walk near the waterfront with Lily skipping between them. For the first time in years, Emily allowed herself to feel almost steady. The city's hum blended with Lily's laughter, and Nathan's quiet presence softened the edge of her constant vigilance. Yet peace has a way of being fragile, vulnerable to the sudden return of shadows. Jessica Miller, Jess as Emily called her, entered the picture like a gust of fresh air. Emily's college friend had always been blunt, the kind of woman who cut through excuses with a single look. When she appeared at the cafe where Emily and Nathan had been sitting, she didn't hesitate. "So," Jess said, sliding into the booth without asking, "this is the famous Nathan? The one from the boat story you swore you made up?" Emily flushed, stammering, but Nathan extended his hand with calm amusement. Jess shook it firmly. Her eyes were sharp, measuring him in seconds. "Good grip," she said. "That's a start." The tension broke, laughter spilling over, but beneath it Jess made her stance clear. She had carried Emily through late-night tears, through divorce proceedings, through the exhaustion of single motherhood. She was fiercely protective. Nathan, to his quiet credit, did not bristle under the scrutiny. He welcomed it, as though he understood Emily needed guardians as much as companions. Their trio met several more times that week. Jess teased, prodded, asked pointed questions about his hours, his intentions, his understanding of the chaos of raising a child. Nathan answered honestly, never promising more than he could stand behind. Emily watched the exchange with something like relief. Finally, someone from her present and someone from her past meeting on neutral ground. But not all figures from the past brought comfort. It was a Friday evening when Emily's world tilted again. She and Nathan had taken Lily to a small Italian restaurant on the edge of Capitol Hill, the kind of place with warm lights strung across the ceiling and checkered tablecloths that felt like home. Lily was coloring on the back of a menu when a familiar, slurred voice cut through the clatter of dishes. "Emily." She froze. The sound was unmistakable, even roughened by drink. Turning, she saw him, Mark Hayes, once sharply dressed and commanding. Now his suit jacket hung askew, his tie stained, his eyes glassy with alcohol. He stumbled toward their table, the smell of whiskey preceding him. "What are you doing here?" Emily asked, her voice low, tight with dread. Mark's grin was crooked, bitter. "Having dinner, same as you. Surprised to see you with company. Is this him? The replacement?" His gaze landed on Nathan, sizing him up with sloppy hostility. Lily shrank against Emily, sensing the tension. Nathan's posture remained calm but protective, shoulders squared, eyes steady. "That's enough," Nathan said evenly. "You're upsetting your daughter." Mark scoffed, the sound harsh. "My daughter. Don't forget that." He leaned closer to Emily, his words cutting. "You think you've built some perfect little life? You'll never erase me." Jess appeared at that moment, having agreed to meet them after work. She took in the scene in one glance and positioned herself between Emily and Mark. "Back off, Hayes," she snapped. "You've done enough damage already." Mark's expression twisted. Of course Jess is here, always meddling, always making Emily think she doesn't need anyone else. His voice rose, drawing stares from nearby tables. Emily felt the old panic rise in her chest. The memory of nights spent begging him to come home, of arguments whispered so Lily wouldn't hear. But something was different now. Jess's solid stance beside her, Nathan's quiet readiness across from her, Lily's small hand gripping hers. Together, they anchored her. Nathan stood slowly, not confrontational, but unyielding. "Mark, this isn't the place," he said, his tone carrying the weight of someone who refused to be moved. "If you care at all about Lily, walk away." For a moment, it seemed Mark might lash out, but then his bravado faltered. His shoulders sagged under the weight of his own decline. He muttered something unintelligible, then turned, weaving clumsily toward the door. The restaurant exhaled in relief as the door closed behind him. Emily's hands shook, but she held them steady around Lily. Tears threatened, but she forced them back. Jess reached across the table, covering her hand. "He's not your story anymore," Jess said firmly. "He's just a chapter you already finished." Nathan said nothing, only placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder, grounding her. Later that night, back at her apartment, Emily sat on the couch while Lily slept in her room. Jess paced, still furious, while Nathan sat nearby, calm as ever. "You can't let him get to you," Jess said. "He wants to pull you back into the wreckage. Don't give him the satisfaction." Emily stared at her hands. "It's not that simple. He's Lily's father. He's always there, even when he's gone." Nathan leaned forward. "You faced him tonight. That's more than you give yourself credit for. He doesn't control you anymore." His voice carried no judgment, only truth. In that moment, Emily realized something. The ghost of her marriage wasn't just Mark. It was the version of herself who had once believed she couldn't survive without him. Tonight, standing firm with Jess and Nathan at her side, she had proved that ghost wrong. It didn't erase the fear, but it carved a space for strength. And as she leaned back, exhaling for what felt like the first time in years, She knew this confrontation was only the beginning of reclaiming her life. After the storm of Mark's sudden appearance, life began to settle into a quieter rhythm. Emily clung to routine like a shield, yet Nathan's presence kept slipping through her defenses. He didn't demand her time, but he was there, waiting outside her building with coffee after a long shift, walking her and Lily through the park on misty afternoons, listening more than he spoke. Slowly, the fabric of their days began to stitch itself together. Lily adored him almost immediately. At first she was shy, clinging to Emily's side when Nathan arrived. But Nathan had a way of respecting distance until it melted on its own. He asked her about school projects, about the books she liked, about the stuffed rabbit she carried everywhere. He never forced laughter, never bribed affection, simply gave her his attention as though nothing else mattered in those small conversations. Within weeks, she was asking if Dr. Nathan could come along to the zoo, if he would watch her ride the carousel, if he could sit next to her at the diner when pancakes arrived stacked high. For Emily, watching Lily's trust unfold was both comforting and terrifying. She wanted her daughter to know kindness, to see men who did not break promises. But every time Lily slipped her small hand into Nathan's without hesitation, a part of Emily's heart clenched. What if it ended? What if history repeated itself? She had survived her own heartbreak, but she wasn't sure she could survive watching her daughter suffer it. One Saturday, Nathan suggested a drive to Cannon Beach. The coast stretched wide, gray, and endless, the kind of landscape that seemed to empty burdens out to sea. They walked barefoot where the waves lapped at the sand. Lily raced ahead, squealing when cold foam splashed her legs. Emily hung back with Nathan, her sweater pulled close. "It feels like another lifetime," she murmured, gazing at Haystack Rock rising out of the surf. "The last time I was here, I thought I knew everything. I thought I was strong enough to love without getting hurt." Nathan glanced at her, then at the horizon. "Strength isn't about not getting hurt. It's about what you do after." His words landed quietly, without pressure, yet they stayed with her long after the tide erased Lily's footprints. Days turned into weeks. They met in the evenings, sometimes at Emily's apartment where Lily sprawled on the rug with crayons, sometimes at Nathan's place, where the river shimmered outside the window and Lily marveled at the city lights. The three of them built routines that felt both temporary and permanent. Pizza nights, board games, bedtime stories where Nathan's voice carried the cadence of calm through the room. But when night fell and Lily was asleep, Emily's doubts stirred. She lay awake, replaying every decision that had led her here, weighing the risk of opening her heart again. She remembered the sting of betrayal, the suffocating loneliness of divorce court, the humiliation of whispers about Mark's affairs. Could she trust her judgment this time? Could she trust Nathan? She didn't hide these fears from him. One evening, after Lily was tucked in, Emily sat on the couch, twisting her hands together. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not of you, of me, of choosing wrong again, of letting Lily believe in something that might not last." Nathan didn't rush to answer. He sat beside her, letting the silence breathe. Then he said simply, "I can't promise the world won't hurt us, but I can promise I won't walk away without a fight. I don't give up on people I love." The word hung between them, love, unplanned but undeniable. Emily's chest tightened, not with panic, but with recognition. She wanted to believe him, and in that moment she almost did. Their days grew warmer, filled with moments that looked suspiciously like a family. At the farmer's market, Nathan carried Lily on his shoulders, while Emily chose vegetables. At the park, he pushed Lily on the swing, while Emily snapped a photo she never meant to take. At home, they cooked together, Nathan clumsy with chopping onions, Emily laughing until tears blurred her vision. Each snapshot felt ordinary, and yet for Emily, ordinary was the very thing she had feared was lost forever. Still, she held herself back, drawing invisible lines. Nathan noticed, but never pressed. He met her hesitation with patience, understanding that rushing her would only break the fragile trust they were building. One evening, they returned to the coast. The sky was painted in shades of pink and violet, the tide low enough to reveal tide pools glittering with starfish. Lily ran ahead with a bucket, determined to collect seashells. Emily and Nathan followed slowly, their hands brushing, then finally intertwining. "Do you ever think about that day?" Emily asked softly. "On the boat?" "All the time," Nathan admitted. "It's the only unfinished chapter in my life." She smiled faintly, eyes on the horizon. Maybe it wasn't unfinished. Maybe it was just waiting for the right page. He squeezed her hand, and for once she didn't pull away. The weeks that followed cemented the shift. Emily found herself leaning on him in ways she hadn't allowed anyone else. When Lily had a fever, Nathan stayed the night, fetching water and checking her temperature until it broke. When Emily's car stalled in the rain, Nathan drove across town without hesitation. These weren't grand gestures, but steady ones, the kind of actions that spoke louder than promises. For Emily, the fear never fully vanished, but it softened under the weight of evidence. Nathan's constancy wore down her walls, not with force, but with presence. He didn't try to erase her past. He simply offered to stand beside her in the present. One Sunday afternoon, as they sat on a blanket at the park, Lily asleep against Emily's lap, Nathan looked at her and said, "You don't have to decide everything today. Just let yourself have this moment." She did. She let herself feel the sun, hear the rustle of leaves, see Nathan's eyes steady on hers. And for the first time in years, Emily allowed hope to feel less like danger and more like possibility. The decision to visit Nathan's parents came quietly, almost by accident. One evening, while Lily colored on the floor and Nathan and Emily sat with mugs of tea, he mentioned his mother had been asking about the friend he spent so much time with. Emily hesitated, nerves flashing across her face. Meeting parents had once meant vows, commitments, futures etched in stone, and she had learned how easily stone could crumble. But Nathan didn't press. He simply said they'd love to meet you. And Lily, his calmness softened the weight of the request. After a long silence, Emily nodded. On a misty Saturday morning, they drove across Portland's east side to a quiet neighborhood shaded by tall maples. Nathan's parents lived in a modest two-story house with a garden that smelled of mint and lavender. As they walked up the path, Emily's hand tightened around Lily's, her mind racing with every insecurity. Would they judge her? Would they see her as baggage? Would they sense how fragile her hope still was? The front door opened before they reached the step. Ravshana, Nathan's mother, stood there in a long cardigan, her dark hair streaked with silver, her smile wide and unguarded. She didn't wait for introductions. She bent immediately to Lily's height, her voice gentle but sure. "And who is this beautiful girl?" Lily looked up at Emily for permission, then shyly answered, "I'm Lily." Ravshana's eyes shone. "Welcome, Lily. I've been waiting to meet you." She reached out, and Lily allowed her hand to be taken, surprising Emily with how quickly trust formed. Inside, the house felt warm in every sense. Photographs on the mantel, the smell of fresh bread, the hum of a radio playing soft classical music. Nathan's father, Robert, emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. He was quieter than his wife, but no less kind. He shook Emily's hand warmly and said to Nathan, "You didn't tell us she was this lovely." The afternoon unfolded with a natural ease Emily hadn't expected. Ravshana served homemade soup and bread, bustling with the energy of a woman who found joy in feeding others. She asked Lily about school, listened with genuine interest, and even promised to teach her how to bake cookies the proper way. Robert asked Nathan about his latest surgeries, then turned to Emily with questions about her teaching and translation work. Not once did she sense judgment in their eyes, only curiosity, warmth, and the quiet delight of parents seeing their son less alone. After lunch, They moved to the living room. Lily sat cross-legged on the rug, playing a board game with Robert, while Emily found herself in the kitchen with Ravshana, helping slice fruit. The older woman paused, knife poised, and said softly, "You've given my son something we couldn't. He's been so alone." Emily's throat tightened. "I don't know what this is yet," she admitted. "I just know it feels real. And that scares me." Ravshana touched her arm gently. "Fear means it matters. Just don't let fear decide for you." When Emily returned to the living room, Nathan caught her eye. His look said everything: gratitude, reassurance, something close to awe. The visit stretched longer than planned. As the evening drew in, Lily grew sleepy, her head resting against Emily's lap. Robert carried her to the couch, covering her with a blanket. Emily sat still, watching her daughter breathe evenly, a picture of peace she hadn't seen in years. The room glowed with lamplight, the air filled with quiet conversation and the clink of teacups. For the first time since her marriage had collapsed, Emily felt the word family settle on her shoulders without breaking her. Driving home that night, Emily stared out the window, city lights blurring into ribbons. "They were kind," she said softly. "Kinder than I expected." Nathan glanced at her. "They see what I see." "What's that?" she asked, wary of the answer. "A woman strong enough to raise her daughter with grace, even when life tried to tear her apart. And someone worth waiting for." Her eyes filled, though she blinked the tears away before Lily stirred in the back seat. She didn't answer, but her hand found his, resting there the entire drive. In the weeks that followed, visits to Nathan's parents became frequent. Sunday dinners, afternoons in the garden, evenings where Lily helped bake cookies with Ravshana and ran through the yard with Robert's old dog. Emily felt herself woven into their rhythm, each thread binding her more tightly to a life she had thought forever lost. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Lily chase fireflies, Emily whispered, "This feels dangerous." Nathan looked at her, puzzled. "Dangerous?" "Yes," she said, her voice trembling, "because it feels like everything I ever wanted. And I don't know if I can survive losing it again." Nathan reached for her hand. "Then don't think about losing it. Think about living it. Right here. Right now." In his words, in his touch, in the laughter of her daughter nearby, Emily felt a truth settle deep inside her. This wasn't just about rekindled love. It was about family reborn, about a second chance at belonging. And for Nathan, the realization came just as sharply. He had thought finding Emily again was the miracle. But watching his parents embrace her, watching Lily call his mother grandma without hesitation, he understood the greater miracle was this: a fractured set of lives drawn together into something whole. Not just love regained, but a family remade. Change did not arrive with trumpets. It slipped in through ordinary days. Phone calls returned on time, meetings that ended without raised voices, a calendar shared for Lily's sake. After the night at the restaurant, Mark vanished for a while, the way men do when shame outpaces explanation. Then, without announcement, he reappeared in the smallest of ways: a message to confirm a pickup time, a polite request to switch weekends because of work, a note asking about Lily's new reading list. Emily kept the boundaries firm. She did not invite conversation beyond logistics. She did not confuse competence with repentance. But she noticed he was showing up. Jess noticed too. At first she scoffed, once burned, twice quarantined. She had no patience for Mark's history of charm weaponized into excuses. Yet life, stubborn in its refusal to be simple, placed them in the same rooms for Lily's sake. A school open house, a Saturday soccer practice, a parent-teacher conference where seats were scarce, and Jess slid into the chair beside him because it was the only one left. The truce began there. A shared pen passed across a desk, a brief nod when Lily's name was praised, a silence that didn't boil. Weeks later, rain anchored the city in its gray hush when Mark approached Jess outside the school. He did not lead with defense. He didn't mention the past at all. "I'm trying to get sober," he said plainly. "It's day 19. Jess searched his face for theater and found only exhaustion. "Good," she said, voice even. "Keep going." She offered him a list, meetings she trusted, a counselor who wasn't afraid of relapse or excuses, a gym where the coach understood how to redirect anger without pretending it wasn't there. "If you waste my time, you won't get a second minute," she warned. He nodded, seeming grateful for the clarity of terms. The arrangement that followed was not sudden and not romantic. It was practical, circumscribed, and anchored to Lily's best interest. Jess sat with him outside church basements before meetings and walked him to the door without crossing it. She texted when he hit 30 days. She didn't celebrate. She simply said, "Now get to 31. Mark did, then 32, then 40, each day its own small, unglamorous victory. On weekends, he arrived for Lily sober on time, with snacks she actually liked instead of gestures designed to impress. When he did not know what to say, he said nothing. When he didn't know how to play, he asked. Lily, testy at first, relaxed inch by inch in the presence of a father who, finally, was not performing but showing up. Emily witnessed the shift with caution. She did not erase memory. She remembered doorways where she had waited alone, the acid of suspicion, the apologies that rolled off Mark's tongue as easily as promises once had. Yet she could not deny what she saw. Lily came home from visits steadier, not spun sugar and crash, but quiet and fed and ready for bed. Mark's text stayed clean, no baiting, no jabs, no sudden eruptions. When missteps came, he named them himself and corrected without prompting. He seemed less certain of his own charm and more interested in basic decency. It did not absolve him. It did not rewrite history, but it altered the present. And the present was where Lily lived. Nathan never competed with any of this. He understood roles, understood that love was not a property deed with exclusive rights. He was there for the weekday dinners, the spelling words practiced at the kitchen table, the broken shoelace before school, the math homework that needed patient unwinding. He led with steadiness, not spectacle. If he felt a tug of fear when Lily ran across a park toward Mark on pickup days, he kept it to himself and met it with trust earned over time. When Lily returned and fell asleep on the couch, he carried her to bed and let the quiet echo with something like gratitude. There was enough love to go around if the adults chose discipline over drama. It was Jess who first named the shape of things. She and Emily stood outside a cafe one morning while Lily chased puddles and Nathan waited inside for their drinks. "Here's the truth," Jess said, chin tilted as if daring anyone to argue. "A girl can have two fathers in her life, one by blood who is trying to be better, and one by choice who never needed the biology to love her right." Emily's eyes stung. She had believed such a sentence was a fairy tale or a trap. Hearing it spoken without romance, without pretense, only as a practical description of what was happening, felt like a key turning. "If Mark keeps doing the work," Jess added, "he belongs in Lily's life. If he doesn't, he doesn't. But Nathan? He belongs because he shows up. Every day. In the small ways that count." The season turned. In spring, daffodils speared through stubborn soil along the sidewalks, and Lily brought home a bean plant from science that Emily kept alive with the same care she lavished on more fragile hopes. Sundays alternated between Nathan's parents' house and the city park. On some afternoons, Mark joined at a distance, arriving for his pickup early and staying on the far bench while Lily finished a game of tag with Nathan. No one narrated it. No one posed. If Lily wanted to race from one man to the other, claiming two pairs of hands as her starting lines, no adult interfered with the physics of her joy. Closure did not appear as a ceremony. It arrived as absence of dread of old scripts, of the buzz in Emily's nervous system that had once kept her scanning every room for the next crisis. She noticed it one ordinary Thursday. She had finished grading papers at the kitchen table, while Lily drew a comic about a superhero librarian who battled noise with a magic index. Nathan, home late, moved quietly around the kitchen, washing dishes already clean. The radio murmured. Rain pattered. For the first time in years, Emily realized nothing inside her was braced for impact. The engine idling under her rib cage had gone off. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of relief. A week later, she met Mark at a coffee shop to discuss summer schedules. He came alone, hands unclenched, eyes clear. He had the look of a man who knew he was still in the first mile of a very long road and had decided not to sprint. He updated her on work, less travel, more structure, and asked about Lily's new favorite book. When the topic turned to them, he didn't plead. "I'm sorry for who I was," he said, voice stripped of theater. "I can't fix the past. I'm trying to do right now." Emily listened and found the usual churn of anger had thinned to something lighter, like mist that dissolves with daylight. She nodded. "Then keep doing right now." When she walked out into the weak sun, she did not feel triumphant. She felt released. With the past softened to its proper size, the present expanded. Emily allowed herself to imagine plans she had shelved, a certificate program in conference planning she had wanted for years, a return to a full teaching schedule once childcare stabilized. Nathan made room without making a fuss. He rearranged call shifts where he could, learned Lily's morning routine down to the sock hoop she invented, and showed up at school recitals with flowers not chosen for grandeur, but for scent Lily loved. When an overnight case held him at the hospital, he FaceTimed for bedtime, reading the last page of a book from a fluorescent-lit call room as if the walls around him were made of oak and lamplight. The three of them began to look like a family no one could misinterpret. By summer, their weekends followed the gentle logic of the city. Farmers market on Saturdays, where Lily fed carrot tops to a rabbit at the petting corner. Long walks along the Willamette where Nathan and Emily matched strides and shared the easy silence of people who no longer needed to prove anything. Visits to Nathan's parents, where Ravshana taught Lily to shape dough and Robert showed her how to coax tomatoes into ripeness. When Lily left for visits with Mark, the apartment did not feel hollow. It felt like a room catching its breath. Emily and Nathan used those hours to tend their own lives, his research, her coursework, the shared work of making space for what was next. What was next arrived one evening in July after a day that looked like nothing special. They had eaten pasta on the balcony while a breeze lifted the edges of napkins. Lily fell asleep halfway through a movie about a talking dog, her head in Nathan's lap, her legs sprawled across Emily's. Nathan carried her to bed and returned to find Emily standing at the window. The river held the last light like a quiet promise. "I used to think revenge meant proving you were wrong about me," she said, eyes still on the water. "Now I think revenge is living a life where your opinion doesn't matter." Nathan stepped beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Sweet revenge," he said, half smiling. "The sweetest," she answered. It was not defiance. It was a recognition. The past was not a throne. It had no crown left to wear here. As summer leaned toward fall, Jess and Mark's careful truce grew into something with shape. It wasn't a sudden romance. It was a collaboration that began to look like companionship. Jess remained clear-eyed. She did not confuse mentorship with salvation, but she allowed what was earned to be acknowledged. They went for runs in the mornings where breath replaced talk and progress could be measured in miles rather than promises. They volunteered at Lily's school book fair and discovered they could share a table without sparring. One evening, after a recovery meeting, Mark admitted he had stopped thinking of sobriety as punishment and started thinking of it as a life with fewer lies. Jess nodded and handed him a banana. "Good," she said. "Now show up tomorrow." Emily watched from a respectful distance and felt something like gratitude for the way the world occasionally learns its lessons. It did not rewrite the damage done, but it refused to keep writing the same chapter. She realized she no longer woke to the old fear that every good thing would be snatched away. Instead, when morning arrived, it brought coffee, lunchboxes, a text from Nathan reminding her to bring a sweater because clouds were moving in from the west, a calendar alert about Lily's art show, the mundane miracles of a life no longer cracking under weight. She was not naive. She understood that happiness required maintenance, that love was a verb disguised as 1,000 small nouns. Keys on a hook, clean spoons, folded laundry. The gas tank never left empty when it could be filled. She understood that forgiveness was not forgetting, but choosing not to swing the same hammer over and over. She understood that Lily's two fathers, each flawed in his own way, could both be present if they kept their vows to show up, one biological, one chosen, and that her daughter's heart could tell the difference without needing a courtroom to define it. On a morning in early autumn, Portland wore its favorite coat. A fine rain, a soft gray sky, the scent of cedar lifted by damp air. Nathan laced his shoes by the door while Lily tugged on a raincoat a size too big, the sleeves rolled twice. Emily wrapped a scarf around her neck and checked the oven, where a banana bread loaf cooled for later. The radio murmured low. Somewhere, a neighbor's dog barked once and fell quiet. Nothing dramatic waited outside. No verdicts, no rescue missions, no declarations. Only a walk to the bakery, a stop at the bookstore, an errand to the market for pears. Nathan opened the door and held out his hand. Emily took it. Lily reached up without looking and claimed the other. They stepped into the soft rain together, the kind that collects on eyelashes and makes everything smell newly possible. The sidewalk shone. Tires hissed along the boulevard. From the river, a gull called once, its voice an echo of a different coast, a different life, a different version of two people who had almost missed their chance and somehow hadn't. They walked without hurry. Nathan felt the quiet settle in his chest the way it always had in an operating room when the worst was over and the best could begin. Emily felt light in her body where a weight had lived for years, an uncoiling she had not dared to hope for. Lily swung their hands and narrated the day ahead as if it were an adventure. Behind them, the door clicked shut on the past that had tried so hard to claim them. Before them, the city opened. They moved forward, not as survivors gripping debris, but as a family stepping into weather that, at last, belonged to them. Sweet revenge did not roar. It did not level reputations or count victories in public. It simply went about its business, setting breakfast, tying a shoe, choosing pears at the market, sending hope to school in a lunchbox. It let the past decay quietly in the compost of its own bad choices. It made room for love to do what love does when unchallenged by drama, grow. And so, on that gentle Portland morning, under a rain that never felt hostile, Nathan held Emily's hand in one palm and Lily's in the other, and the three of them stepped out together, away from old ruins, out of long shadows, toward the ordinary brightness of a life rebuilt.